region. Mississippi today is also committed to developing the next generation of distinguished media professionals who reflect the state's diversity by recruiting exceptional graduates from the state's universities and colleges. And Delta State University appreciates and welcomes that partnership. Our first presenter and panelist today is the founder of Mississippi Today, Andrew Lack, who doubles in his spare time as chairman of NBC News and MSNBC. He oversees editorial and business operations for the award-winning television and digital news properties at both networks. Mr. Lack chose Mississippi for the site of this innovative approach to news coverage, largely because of his multi-generational family ties to the Delta. In fact, his grandfather was mayor of Greenville. Mr. Lack is an NBC veteran, having served previously as president of NBC News. Under his leadership, the network transformed into America's most watched news organization, with familiar industry-leading programs such as NBC Nightly News, Meet the Press, Today, and Dateline NBC. He subsequently served as NBC president and chief operating officer. Earlier in his career, he was chairman of the Bloomberg Media Group, chairman and CEO of Sony Music Entertainment, and an executive at CBS, where he produced 60 Minutes and earned 16 Emmy Awards for his news work. That was on cue. Joining Mr. Lack on the panel is Walter Isaacson, President and CEO of the Aspen Institute, which is a nonpartisan educational and policy studies organization based in Washington, D.C. The Aspen Institute is a nonpartisan forum for values-based leadership and the exchange of ideas. It brings together people with different outlooks to search for common ground and make the world a better place. Mr. Isaacson previously served as chairman and CEO of CNN and the editor of Time magazine. He's the distinguished author of several books about famous people, such as Steve Jobs, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein, and Henry Kissinger. And his most recent work is The Innovators: How a Group of Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. Among Mr. Isaacson's many accomplishments and community-oriented activities is his past service as chair for Teach for America, a program that we know very well on this campus because we serve as a training center. He's also been chairman of the U.S. Broadcasting Board of Governors, which runs Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and other international broadcast programs for the United States. Mr. Isaacson's wife, Kathy Isaacson, is also with us today. Welcome, Kathy. Moderating our discussion this morning is Mississippi's own Jim Barksdale. Mr. Barksdale is chairman of the board and president of Barksdale Management Corporation, a private company that manages his investments and philanthropic activities. He also serves as chairman of Spread Networks and has served as president and CEO of Netscape Communications Corporation until its merger with America Online, and prior to that, as CEO of AT&T Wireless Services. Mr. Barksdale is a member of the boards of Time Warner, Federal Express, where he also once served as an executive, and In-Q-Tel. Joining us today as well is the other half of the dynamic Barksdale duo, Donna Barksdale. Donna serves as executive chair of the board of directors of Mississippi Today. Ms. Barksdale is well known throughout our state for her leadership in educational activities, private business, public philanthropy, and church and civic engagement. Together, as most of us in this room know, Jim and Donna and their charitable foundation have made an extraordinarily generous and meaningful impact on the state of Mississippi, especially in the field of education, with the Barksdale Honors College at Ole Miss, the Barksdale Reading Institute, the Mississippi Principal Corps, and Parents for Public Schools Schoolhouse to State House project. And I would be remiss if I didn't recognize three individuals, very briefly, who helped bring all of this together today and to locate it here at Delta State. First, the irrepressible and universally loved Carol Puckett. And then Cleveland's own unstoppable Nan and Mike Sanders. Thanks to each of you for your support and loyalty. And now for a taste of one of the things that we at Delta State do best, serve as a host for forums on important issues of the day. Please welcome our panel, Andy Lack and Walter Isaacson, and our moderator, Jim Barksdale.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is this live? Am I on? Barely. Barely. Now there's an objective answer. Like, well, how do you read me? About 4 by 5?
Yeah.
Can we get 5 out of it? Can everybody hear me? Yes. All right, I will try to speak loudly. Look, my job is to bring out from these two fellows hopefully an informative discussion on the whole thing we call the new media and its effect on the most interesting thing going on right now in many people's lives, at least, and that is the presidential election of 2016. What effect is it having on the election? What's changed about it from just 2012? What's changed about it since 2000? How is this changing the world of politics and political persuasion and politicking in general and canvassing and everything else? Now, I'm sure many of you have many ideas about it or questions about it, so when we finish talking about this in about 25, 30 minutes, I would love it if you would feel free to ask questions of something on your mind, and we'll try to answer them. I must say it's very dark in here. I can't see very much of what's out there. But assuming you're still out there, the way we want to cover this discussion is, I would like by the end of this discussion for you to not be able to tell which political candidate these two people might, or I, would be in favor of. This is a nonpartisan discussion. This is about the subject of the effects of new media on politics, not about a particular political candidate, although I think to represent points we're going to have to name some names and say this candidate did this and this one did this, but I don't want you guys to get into campaigning for any particular candidate. All right? I mean, don't do it. All right, so here we go. I'm going to start with Andy. What do you think this particular 2016 election is doing differently from past ones in the use of new media? New media, by the way, is, well, I'll let you define new media from your point of view.
Well, I think new media, colloquially, generally speaking, means social media. There are all these new platforms on which you can distribute your views, your ideas, as all of you know, online. You get them on your mobile. You can pretty much understand or hear from just about anybody on any subject and any hour of the day, and these presidential candidates are no different. And so we've seen, for the first time probably that I can recall, in the case of Twitter, say, Donald Trump pretty much telling you what he thinks all day long about whatever he may be hearing that's either pleasing him or not cheering him up. You can get in 140 characters pretty rapidly. That's a change. That's a sea change. Haven't seen that before. I don't know that its impact is changing the way we cover the campaign, but the reality of his ability to share his thoughts in the way that he does is unique. I think, Walter, I don't know what your view of that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if you look back throughout our history, most of the time we've had a media that's been very fractured. In colonial days, you look at Philadelphia, when Ben Franklin, somebody I wrote about, comes in, there are 11 newspapers. He starts at 12. One of them's for the proprietors, one of them for the royal family, one of them is for the rebels. They're all, you know, but then in the 1950s, we got a consolidation where you had broadcast networks, big three networks, and they tried to be more broad-based because they had to get more than a third of the audience in order to win. Same with newspapers. They became monopoly newspapers in town, so they had to serve a broad base of citizenry. The big change I think that's happened now is we have gone back to having a very fractured media. Now you can go to wherever you want on the talk radio dial, from the left end of the dial to the right end of the dial, and be part of that 5% of the audience that really has found an ideological niche to hear the news from. Likewise, you can go to the corner of the blogosphere that you like the best and get reinforced by that. And even whether it's cable TV or news outlets, they're dozens of them, so if you don't like the opinions being expressed, you can change the channel. But it also means that the people on those channels tend to be more opinionated. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, even certainly the talk radio dial, people gather their audience by being more opinionated. And so I think the sea change that has happened is we become a little bit more fractured as a society, a little bit more polarized as a society, and unfortunately the discourse has become more poisonous. The upside is when people say, well, is the media liberal or whatever, you say, well, there's no one media. If you're looking at Sean Hannity, he's not a liberal. If you're looking at Rachel Maddow, she's not a conservative. So you can find the person you like, but it also means we don't have the Huntley and Brinkley who, you know, when we were growing up in your network, I never knew what Huntley and Brinkley's political opinions were, so we had more of a common ground.
I don't think that choice is a bad thing, though. And I think Twitter actually is a good thing for presidential candidates or any candidates to use to get their views across. And the more we hear from them, the more we see them, the more we understand what they're thinking, to the extent they want to share that with us. And in the case of these candidates, at least Mr. Trump is very keen to share. That's a good thing for journalists.
Yeah, but it's a good thing, but we also need the common ground where you say, okay, this tries to be objective, and I'm going to give you a free political or product announcement. When you look at the demand for Mississippi Today, it's because there isn't sort of a well-reported, very trusted place for information these days as much as there used to be. When all journalists at least made the pretense of saying, well, let me try to give both sides. And so I think in an era in which we've had fractured media and polarized media, you begin to sense welling up a demand for well-reported, less partisan media. And Mississippi Today, and I hope, you know, you watch it at the Texas Tribune, you watch it in other places, I hope that's going to be the next wave of this social media revolution.
The product plug here for Mississippi Today deserves a round of applause. Deeply appreciated and duly noted. And there is a tin cup that each of you can express your enthusiasm for that thought. I would just say, and Barksdale will appreciate this, the numbers, the data on what people are watching, what they're seeing. For NBC News, more people are still watching the nightly news than are watching Rachel Maddow, Sean Hannity, Bill O'Reilly combined. And they watch with a religious conviction, in quotes, every night at 6:30. They know where to find it. And the same is true of the Today Show. We haven't seen our audiences decline in this particular election cycle because of any of the new media. We have seen our audiences decline on the broadcast platform, these big shows, because, as Walter points out, we live in a very fragmented universe. So if you feel like watching a rerun of your favorite movie at 9 o'clock in the morning instead of watching the third hour of the Today Show, none of you make that choice, I know, but if you did, our numbers go down. And there are just a lot of choices for us to make. And I think we all share a concern, and this is where it comes back to the Mississippi Todays and organizations like it, that that democracy suffers when we are not well informed. And so the more attention we can get to local news organizations like Mississippi Today or national news organizations like the broadcast networks and the cable networks, we're better off as a country. And there is a feeling that that's cracking a little bit. And I think that's to your point.
You know, Jim, you were part of the original wave of things changing with AOL, in which all of a sudden you had alternative ways to get information. And AOL put a premium on community, which is this notion of having bulletin boards, discussions, chat rooms, auditoriums like this, but they'd be online, and bringing people together. And I was wondering if, you know, when you were back then in the early days of AOL, you were sensing this notion of a new form of community.
Look, I'm the moderator, Walter.
But
I'm not supposed to.
We've run out of things to say.
No, first of all, I was not with AOL.
Yeah.
We were acquired by AOL after we had been very successful
And then, yeah.
in inventing the internet at Netscape. No, I take your point, though. There was a great debate in the early days of those of us who are in the business of trying to get audiences' eyeballs to look at the internet, in our case at Netscape, where we would try to find things that were of interest to people. I always told people it's the best way to do market research I'd ever seen, from my FedEx days or IBM days or anywhere. Used to be when you wanted to do market research, you would hire a group of people to come in a focus group. It cost you a lot of money. Look at them through a one-way mirror like they didn't know you were looking at them, and ask them questions. That was the classic type of advertising market research. Well, at Netscape, I told the guys, I said, look, this is the best thing in the world. We'll put a page up on some subject, political or other subject, and if they hit on it, we call it a product. And if they don't, we call it market research. In other words, it costs you almost nothing to put a page up to create a product that was of interest. One of our first interesting products, which nobody in this auditorium will remember, was a thing called FishCam. Anybody ever looked at FishCam on the internet? It was exciting. One of our programmers had an aquarium in his cubicle, and he set a camera in front of it all day long. We were just trying to show over Netscape that you could watch moving live video over the internet, something that had never been done before. And so we developed a number of products that did find an audience, but it's like dog food, you know. If you make this wonderful product and you call it dog food and you put it out there and the dogs don't eat it, it's not dog food. You can call it dog food all day long, but it's not. If the dogs eat it, it's called dog food. So we've found through the internet, and it goes on today at a much higher velocity and speed, my God, the numbers are so boggling, where you're looking at new things, new ideas every day created by smart, mostly young people, not all, who are trying to get your attention. And in the age of politics, but particularly the presidential election cycle, they're really trying to get your eyeballs to look at whatever they're pushing. In some cases, I think some of it's pretty scurrilous. In other cases, it's interesting and insightful. And in other cases, it's just somebody's uninformed opinion, but they're right to put it up there. Most of it, I certainly wouldn't say all, but most of it is partisan. Now, back to your point earlier, and I'm going to ask you another question about this. You know, when we started Mississippi Today, one more plug, the thing that attracted it to me and funding it, helping fund it, was Andy's idea. We met at his Ideas Festival years ago when we started talking about this. So it's one of the product of the Aspen Ideas Festival. Take credit for it, Walter.
We like that product plug too. Yeah, we're going to be an advertising.
We thought, you know, that there was a genuine audience for people who want nonpartisan news. Every day I read the Wall Street Journal, I read our local newspaper, the Clarion Ledger, and I read the New York Times. And my opinions every day are formed by those three newspapers. I watch the news on television in the morning, every morning. And I figure if I can read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and come away somewhere in the middle, I'm doing all right. Not too much of this, not too much of that. Now, that's the basis of the program. But let me ask you a question. In the last 8 presidential elections, going back to the late 80s, the 2 candidates who finally had the runoff for president of the United States, I saw this statistic yesterday on one of your shows. In every case where there was a negative overall rating, in other words, one candidate might have a plus favorability rating and the other candidate might have a minus, they would just take the net of that. In every race where there was a net minus, which was most of the races, if you think about it, one candidate generally liked more than the other candidate. It's all titter-totter sort of stuff. The margin was like 6 or 7% of the poll. See what I'm saying? This year, this election, the negative combined margin is 35%. I mean, if you were just a mathematician cruising through various statistical analyses, you would say, wow, that is something. That may be a trend, may not be a trend, but it's certainly a big, big change. 35%. In some cases, 10 times what the other elections have been. My question to y'all is, do you think, you were talking about how these people are focusing on different points of view, from Hannity to...
Maddow.
Yeah, but Hannity be on this side. Who would you put on the other side?
Rachel Maddow.
That'd be a good counterbalance. Some like potatoes, some like potato. If you took that, do you think that has anything to do with this aberration, or are these just two exceptionally unliked candidates?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know,
Oh, yeah,
you have
what?
you have there are a lot of factors, and both of those are among them. You have a tropical depression now coming through the Gulf. You'll hear about it on Saturday when it gets here. And there's lots of causes. There's heat, and there's the rain, there's a low pressure system, and there's, you know, something coming in. And so these things all form a storm. And the storm we got this year was you had two candidates who, for a variety of reasons, can just stir up the ire of other people. I mean, they're not exactly calming influences like their running mates are. I mean, Mike Pence and Tim Kaine are not going to stir up a lot of hatred or something. You combine that with the fact that you have a media in which, especially in some of the corners of the blogosphere, just spewing out vitriol against the opponent.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So that would have gotten you halfway to where we are now, and you add these two candidates to it. You know, if it had been Mike Pence versus Tim Kaine, you could have had the blogosphere spewing out vitriol, but you wouldn't have gotten these negative ratings. On the other hand, I would say more than half of the problem is the fact that social media and new media tends to, with its anonymity and allowing people to be anonymous, allow people to be more vitriolic, more hateful, and it pulls apart our civic society somewhat, but it certainly adds to the negative ratings of our candidates.
Do you think that they should allow that anonymity?
Who's the they in that sense?
I think that...
The world of the people who run the internet.
Including people who have MSNBC.com.
Me.
I would think that, I feel very strongly about this, which is...
You could theoretically
Yeah.
create an environment
with
that
no
would-
anonymity.
that does not have anonymity.
Right.
Our news order, our Mississippi Today, we allow comments, but it goes through Facebook, so at least we get your...
Right. So
False
I
identity.
believe very strongly that you should have the choice to be in an environment where people aren't anonymous.
Or
That-
are not.
Are not anonymous. And that's what you're doing with Mississippi Today. It's going to be my last product plug, because you only paid me for 3 of them, which is you want to rescue what you had in the early days of the internet, from the well to AOL, this notion that if you're in a place where you're reading comments, you kind of trust the people there and they're not totally anonymous. You need to have that, as you do on Mississippi Today, where at least you have to link to your Facebook page, so you can't be totally anonymous. And I think we deserve places on the internet and services on the internet that have authenticated ID, so that we can have the type of civil society you have in this room, where you can't say totally vitriolic things, because people know who you are.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there, but this is a big but for me. I should say, just taking a half step back, because I may not have this chance again, and I hope others feel this way. I'm cautiously optimistic that the American people will choose the right person for this job of President of the United States. I have no idea who that's going to be, and I have no idea over the next 60 days as we sprint to the finish line what's going to happen. I do think what we're concerned about, to quote, I think it was Pat Moynihan, senator from New York, who said, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own set of facts. And that's the conundrum here. Mississippi Today chooses to try to figure out what is the set of facts around every given question that all of us may be asking ourselves, whether it's in the Delta or in the state capitol. What's really happening here? What's really going on? What is the truth behind any particular issue or problem that the state, or in the case of this presidential election, the country is facing? And we have two candidates duking it out on their view of some of these problems. And social media is presenting a different set of facts, depending on where you dial in, that could distort, in many ways, the public dialogue around what really is happening with education in the country. What really is the problem, if we were going to get political about it, with the wall that Donald Trump would like to build between the U.S. and Mexico? What really is going on with the Clinton Foundation, and how Secretary Clinton has handled her responsibilities in relation to that family foundation? They're legitimate, good questions. What's the facts around them? And it's hard to cut through the noise and get the answers. But it was ever thus, in my humble opinion. And I think the more people who are banging away at that, the better off generally we are. You know, as the class historian here, the coarseness of the public dialogue was as vulgar in Thomas Jefferson's time as it is today.
Right.
It's different on different media, different platforms, but it was Jefferson, you'll have the quote right, said he'd rather have government with newspapers than government without newspapers. But I think it was a tough call for him when he said that.
And
Plus, he was writing one of the newspapers himself and criticizing his opponent, which he did not point out publicly. by the way.
Correct.
And it did take us a century or so to get the facts on Tom's life.
Right.
yeah, we were talking about, well,
So, all that said, I would reflect back on, I've been covering presidential campaigns since 1980. I covered my first campaign, I went to my first political convention as a reporter to Detroit to cover Ronald Reagan. And I was surrounded by a lot of people who thought Reagan was a buffoon, an actor, a guy who, you know, his principal experience and qualifications for the job was he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, which did not exactly seem to recommend him to this role. He was the governor of California, but if you listen to the people who disliked him, it was pretty much SAG, Screen Actors Guild, that was going to kill the country if he became president. You know,
I'm going to push back a bit because I was there too at Cobo Hall in Detroit in 1980 and all. You had a very distinct choice between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
For that matter, Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy, and you know Ronald Reagan and the people opposing him, including you know in the Ford. The vitriol, hatred, spewing of things was, in my mind, nowhere near. Now, maybe people were saying it in private or they were saying it in their bars, but what happened is now what people said really in private in bars, they get to tweet out in 140 characters and they get a megaphone. I remember that being an incredibly civil campaign between two very decent people, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter.
you're right, that's fair. But we would say
So it was a bad example.
it was a bad
No. I was trying to play class historian.
No,
We go back to the Joe McCarthy era before you and I were covering things when things were really
Let's
bad.
go back to the Harding election.
Yeah.
You were there.
Harding.
I point out one thing. At
Where's
this
your
current
dad?
rate, this negative, and then I'm going to ask you the last question, we go to the floor. Negative of -7, -6, -5 through all these elections, and all of a sudden -35 on favorability combined of the two candidates.
Yeah.
These are the two most unpopular candidates we've ever had the choice of voting for. Now, there are two other people going to be on the ballot, I understand. But at that course and speed, you realize, it won't be long, there will be a 100% dislike between both of them. I mean, and I think there is a trend, and I think it's partly caused because of the vitriol that's allowed to exist that everybody now has access to, whether you want to see it or not. And you read some things that have no more basis in fact than the man in the moon. And you say, well, it's on the internet, must be true.
No, no, we don't say that.
We used to say that.
That's a bad example then, I guess.
Okay. With that, I just happen to believe that there's something. Now maybe it's going to self-correct.
Let me argue
it cannot
that it
go on.
self-corrects.
Huh?
Let me argue that it self-corrects, and that's the beauty of American democracy, and it always has. And you
I
go
think
through every
maybe-
cycle,
I probably agree with
including getting from Richard Nixon to Gerald Ford, a great self-correction we had. Einstein, who's as smart as anybody on this panel probably, was watching in the 1950s when Joe McCarthy and all these people were taking away Oppenheimer's security clearance, and he writes to his son, and he said, I've seen this happen before. I was there when the Nazis, he was in Germany. I was there when the communists came in. I've seen this movie before, America's going to happen to. And then about 4 years later, between Edward R. Murrow, one of your heroes, and Eisenhower and a few others, all of a sudden Joe McCarthy is knocked off the playing field. And Einstein
He's dead.
said,
He was dead by then.
well, he was, it was Joe Welch.
He lost his reputation,
yeah,
certainly, before he
Eisenhower
died.
and the War
Agreed.
Department and Army Department knocked him
Have
off
you
the
no
playing field.
decency, sir?
Have you no decency? Joseph Welch, when he was,
And that was a TV moment, by the way.
Yeah.
Let us not forget.
and it would have gone viral in our day and age, which would have been good. But it's a self-correcting moment I'm talking about, where things happen like that. And Einstein writes, American democracy, to his son, he says, I was wrong. It's like a gyroscope. Just when you think it's going to fall over, it self-corrects. I think when you look, and I only promise you 3 product plugs, but your final one, when you look at a Mississippi Today's and things like that rising, you say, okay, it's people deciding they want to self-correct a bit and have some decency in the media.
Well, let's hope so.
Let's ask the audience.
I'm going to.
He's the moderator,
You played moderator for a minute. I get to play moderator. Can I ask a question to the audience?
Sure. Do we have a microphone?
Yes.
We have,
Are you worried about this rancor?
we have some lights up, is that possible?
In the political discourse? Is it, what's your view of it? Yeah.
Clap if you're worried. Clap if you're not worried. Clap if you don't give a damn. All right, we're going to get somebody elected here, whatever we do. Now, I would like to ask the audience, if you have questions, please feel free and raise your hand and we'll have a microphone brought to you. We got some mighty smart people in this room. And see where you're going. Yeah, Churchill said we try everything in America and then finally we do it right. We make all the wrong choices, then finally we get the right choice.
I have a question. One of the most pernicious things or memes that seems to me that's coming out of this right-left dialogue is this idea that our election system is rigged and that it's going to delegitimize what we hold dear in terms of our election process. I guess my specific question would be, what could a platform like Mississippi Today do in, as Mr. Isaacson said, tipping it back the other way so that there is trust in the election process?
That's a good question. Who wants to take that one? Is the election rigged?
Well, first of all, I'd love to know exactly what you mean by rigged. Do you think, one side will rig the voting booths or something? Or the money will rig it, or?
It seems to me that this is coming out more and more daily, that people are saying, to quote one of our candidates, that the election is rigged, and that that this is getting into the zeitgeist of Americans, and that if the outcome does not favor one or the other's
Yeah, I think
favorite
it's a very
candidate.
dangerous thing to be saying that unless there's something specific, such as, I mean, I am somewhat worried that the Russians have hacked into various databases. They seem to have hacked into a couple of election monitoring systems. I would hope the FBI and others and do things like you have in Mississippi, which is you have a backup paper ballot system, you know, so that nobody can hack the computers. I do not think anybody in America is hacking computers that, you know, neither campaign, neither Trump nor Hillary Clinton's campaign is doing things like that. Therefore, to get to what news organizations can do, I think that news organizations can be watching polls, watching the voting, you know, doing a sense of, are people trying to be blocked from the polls? Are people trying to be, you know, kicked out, not allowed to vote? Or people, you know, somehow the vote tallies are being, somebody's trying to manipulate them? That's what an independent news organization can do. That's not my biggest fear at the moment, and my bigger fear is that people are spreading the word on TV and parts of the blogosphere that, oh, this whole nation is rigged, you know, your vote's not going to count because they're rigging this election, which I think is pernicious. I don't quite know what the word pernicious means, but I think Andy will agree.
It's a good,
Yeah,
Not good.
stinky, I think is the word I meant, yeah.
other question?
Good morning. Hi. My question is about the social media platforms. I'm not concerned so much about the vitriol as I am the fact that many of these platforms tend to reward the oversimplification of public discourse. So, you know, in 144 characters, you can say huge 36 times, but you're really not saying much at all. It rewards a punchline. It rewards oversimplification. How can that be combated? Because it is a very useful tool, particularly for citizen journalists, right? I mean, that's been a new phenomenon. The private citizens attending these rallies and live tweeting reportage, and often these tweets get picked up by larger vehicles. So if the real question is the tendency towards oversimplification, how can these platforms combat that, given part of their appeal is the strict limits on the amount that you can say in one tweet?
Andy, you want to
Yeah, I don't know how I don't control any of those platforms, and I don't have a strong view of trying to persuade them how they might control it. I've never had any success with the Facebooks or I don't want to make another bad example, but those platforms are controlled by big technology companies, and if from an audience standpoint, from a reader, user, viewer standpoint, there's the same old issue that we've always had. If you're not trusting what you're seeing, and you've got a bullshit barometer, if you pardon my French, you can start making other choices. You've got to go find what you can trust, and that's been a historic issue for all of us. You know,
Well,
you got to read more deeply, or you got to watch more, or you got to be careful what the conventional wisdom may be on any given day, floating out of a lot of these platforms. You ask a good question as it relates to my crowd, the media crowd, who I don't think we do a good job of editing, as good a job as we should. We're always working at it, of editing a lot of what you're concerned about, as the way you frame the question. And we think about that a lot, and try to pull it out of our coverage where we think it's not helpful or irrelevant.
Can I make a point?
Yeah.
I think you've made a very good point, and I think every election cycle brings a new media product to the fore. Andy and I go back to 1980 with something called the hotline. Suddenly came, and it was almost like sent to you by wire service, but it told you everything that was happening that day. Twitter is the new one this election cycle, and I'm hoping that somebody's going to invent the next iteration of it, because I do think Twitter, with its anonymity and 140 characters, is not a great platform for discussion. And I do think the invention of the next platform will be things like smart comment sections in which people can't be totally anonymous, that are somewhat curated and moderated, where serious discussion can happen. You have places like Medium, which is invented by the guy who invented Twitter, almost as a way for him, Ev Williams, to say, you know, I didn't exactly get it right with Twitter, so Medium is going to be the next way to do it, which is a longer form, more moderated. People get to vote on what's a serious comment. But I'm hoping that on things like Mississippi Today and other places, Washington Post, New York Times, they'll figure it out. You can have a type of discussion section that has serious comments where the crowd gets to vote up the ones they think are the most interesting, where they're real humans curating them, so that if somebody says something that's totally wrong or vitriolic, it gets knocked out.
I think that's spot on. I think this also is, I hope, responsive to the heart of your question. We see all the time, I see all the time in research that we get for NBC News feedback and MSNBC, that people are hungry for a diversity of opinion, but they want both sides. They do not want one side. To go to one place for one side and then have to go shopping for another place to get another side, and then try to compare the two sides or work their way through that infrastructure online. They'd like to find news organizations. I'd like to hope we're working on that at NBC and Mississippi Today, where you can get both sides when you are doing what Walter shared, some discrete aggregation of lots of different voices.
Harder work, but it's harder work.
It's harder work.
It means
And
human
requires,
involvement.
It requires, which is something the two of us have spent the better part of our lives doing, it requires an editorial function that you bear a lot of responsibility for.
I don't think it was mentioned in the introduction that Walter, correct me if I'm wrong, was also before CNN was editor of Time magazine, so he has experience in this area.
So but you got to edit with us. You got to edit what you want, what you don't want, or what your, as I said, your BS barometer is triggering. And that's, I think, actually, that's part of what's great about America and our democracy and the new digital world order that we live in.
Other question? Here's a question right here.
That gentleman there got the mic.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of people who filed for president besides the two major party candidates. And, you
A
know,
lot of sorry.
the
People filed
Federal
for
Election
not major
Commission
party
maintains a database of everybody. You want to file for president, there's over 1,000 people, I think,
That's
that have
right.
filed.
That's correct.
Some with some very colorful names. I don't think all those guys are serious. But what I wanted to ask you all about is, we've got all this, we're talking about new media today. Is this the thing that's going to get us to a point where we can have more choices other than just Republicans or Democrats in the White House?
I sure hope so. I think that the digital revolution has disrupted every industry with the exception of the stranglehold that the, political system has on the way we select presidents. And I thought that this year, with the high negativity ratings that Jim talked about, would be the time that there might be breakthroughs for third, fourth, fifth, sixth party candidates. And a disruption that happens once every 60 years in America, where you have a realignment and maybe the emergence of a new party. But somehow or another, it didn't happen this year, and I wish it had.
I give you a quick data point on third party and fourth party. We all thought, many of us at least, going back to the early part of the primary season, that we would see a third party candidate emerge. And that there's a threshold for third party candidates, Jim and I were talking about this last night, to get onto the debate stage, during the primary.
I think it's 15%.
And to get onto the, once we get into the presidential election debates that are governed by the Presidential Debate Commission, a third-party candidate would have quite an audience for his or her views. That didn't happen, to our surprise. or at least hasn't happened quite yet. I think there is a window in which there is still a possibility of it happening. But the most interesting data point for me and it will be very, I have, again, no governor on how this is going to play out, but my colleagues and I think, curious what you may think, that this first presidential debate may be the most watched hour and a half in the history of news as we know it on TV. And everywhere I go, I get a sense that that debate is going to get a remarkably large global audience. And that will be,
When is it going to be? It's a month from now, right?
Yeah, it's, I think it's September, oh God, September 23rd. I have a block about it because part of the debate, part of the dynamic around the debates is they choose moderators, and I'm hoping, of course, that there might be an NBC moderator, so these dates.
Or Mississippi Today.
Or Mississippi. Has done a great job. Give him a high five. Anyway, you all, is that on your calendar, watching these debates? And do you feel that in your community, an interest in?
I can remember when televised debates were called the new media.
Yeah.
When Nixon debated Kennedy.
How many?
And it totally changed the vote.
It did.
Seeing them on television.
Yeah. I'm just curious how many in this audience, what I would describe as political junkies on some level, how many hours of, yeah, okay, junkies, you know who you are, raise your hand. How many of you watch more than an hour of news or read more than an hour of, or consume more than you do? Okay. All right.
That's why they're here.
And how much of that time do you discover that in on digital platforms? Look at it, read online, or how many of you are digital rats? God bless. Great.
You just call them rats?
Well, natives.
You think that's
Digital
great?
natives. I said.
Nutria.
Trolls.
No, that's not a good word
I know it is.
for the.
Well, folks, I really appreciate your attention this morning.
Here's
Thank you
one more
very
question.
much. Wait, one more question.
What impact do you think the old media had on the Trump phenomena?
Old media on Trump?
Yes. Did old media produce the Trump phenomena or have a large bearing in?
I think old media was basically against Trump, but that's my opinion from the
That's
beginning.
exactly the question I'm asking. Was the fact that old media was against Trump and because of how old media was perceived, is that what's part of produced the Trump phenomenon?
Donna just said it was also the reality TV phenomenon. But I'll let Andy answer that.
Well, I'm not sure distinguish between how many Republicans thought that that they were old mainstream Republicans were against Trump, and how that was reflected in the media, because there are really two campaigns going on. There's Trump versus Clinton, and there's Trump versus Trump, and he's part of that campaign, and the Republican Party is part of that campaign. There's a conflict there.
But he also made old media a part of his opposition,
Well,
and he attacked old media.
He certainly did.
Yeah.
And that, I think, a part of is a reaction to political correctness and a reaction to old media, that you had a reaction that came up and created a situation that I never would have
Yeah,
expected.
I would just add, though, that there is not one grand media, old media, new, whatever. You know, people are watching all sorts of channels, all sorts of people. You know, the most popular cable news people, as I say, are Hannity and O'Reilly. So people say, well, the media is biased. Well, no, you know, that's like, you know, saying the air is biased. There's just many different ways people can get information now and opinions.
Well, as we wrap up this program, special thanks to our presenters and our moderator, Andy Lack, Walter Isaacson, and Jim Barksdale. Gentlemen, we now present you with the world-famous Delta State Green gift basket.
Yay! Better have an okra in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to grant our guests their release because they have to get off to the next stop over at Ole Miss. But I do have some announcements before they leave, so we're going to allow them to depart now.